Hey guys, welcome back to Paracord Planet. Today I'm going to attempt to teach you a very difficult knot. It's the bow knot or treasure knot. This knot is really hard to find information for online, as it's not in the Ashley Book of Knots, but I was only able to find information on it from Japanese blog posts. And my Japanese is a little rough, so I stuck it through Google Translate, and this is what I got back.
The crunchy shape is a cute knot. There is quite a lot of thickness and presence.
And then finally, I found a Paracord Guild tutorial that I watched over and over again until I got this knot down a month later. So we're going to start out with a simplified version so we can get the hang of the concepts used, and then we'll jump into the full version that you saw in the thumbnail. To make this knot, you're going to want a piece of corkboard or even cardboard that you can stab some pins into to keep everything in place while we're setting it up. In addition, we'll just need those pins and some paracord. For the small knot, I need about 5 feet. For the larger one, we're going to want more like 8. With that, let's dive in. To start out, we just want to leave a couple inches of cord at the end so that this doesn't pull out of our knot as we're forming it. So we want that facing down, and we're going to be making a couple bites or loops in our cord, just like this, back and forth in an S pattern. And as we're doing that, we want to pin it down as much as you feel you need to keep everything in place. I'm going to be pretty liberal with the pins, just so you can see everything on camera and I don't have to hold it down with my fingers. Once we have 2 loops on the top and 1 on the bottom, we're going to bring this end of the cord, right here, across the top. So we're going to go over, under, so over this first cord, underneath the second, over the third, and underneath the fourth. Pull all of your slack through and get rid of any twists. So now we really have 2 loops on top and 2 on bottom as well. We're going to continue on using that end of the cord and go across the bottom. We're not doing over under on this one. We're going to go over all of the cords except that last one and go down through that last loop. And then we'll go back the same way under all of those cords. So we'll tuck it underneath that standing end and both of these loops here. So that the final result looks like that. Now back at the top, we're going to follow this cord through the knot. So we're going under, over, under. Until we come out the other side. And you'll see we're coming up through this bite, or up through this loop. And we're going to come back down through the loop next to it. So down through that one, and then pull all of our slack through again. Making sure it lays flat so we don't have any twists in our cord. As we're forming this, we want all of our rows right here to line up nicely and not overlap with each other. Then going back down to the bottom, we want this to lay right alongside it, and we'll be going down through that first loop this time, rather than this one. So down through there, and back to the left, going underneath. To end things off, we're going to take that same end and just bring it up through that first loop on the top. So that's the end of our setup. Now comes the hard part of tightening it down. Before you take your pins out, I would encourage you to just hold on to these cords right here because we don't want those to overlap and get tangled with each other. What I like to do is pick them up in my hand and just pinch them in my fingers right like that. So with that, we'll take the pins out. So now we want to keep track of our loops. We have vertical loops and horizontal loops. These ones here that are laying flat, we want to pull those tight at the beginning, along with our ends. On the top, it's pretty easy to see them. This is one, and this is one, but then on the bottom, they're a little bit harder to see. We've just got this one down here. These two are not horizontal loops. So we'll start by pulling all of our ends and horizontal loops tight. So that's, again, this one, this one, this one, and this one, along with our last end. So one by one, we can just kind of pull on those. First tighten this down. Then this loop, we're going to be pulling on this side of it. Pulling that in. Then this next one, pulling this side. This loop here, pulling on this side. And then lastly, pulling that end tight. You're starting to see that we're closing our knot down, and it's starting to look more symmetrical too. We've got our 2 loops on bottom and 2 loops on top. So now going back up to the top, we want this loop to be on top of our end. So we want it stacked like this with our end cord here going underneath. So since this side of our loop is on top, followed around, this side should be on bottom, with our next loop being on the top of it. We'll keep on following that around. This side should be under with the next loop on top, under with our end cord on top. So now I'm going to slowly let go of this left hand, and using my right hand, grab onto these loops right at the base like this, and just pinch them between my fingers. Do that on the top and the bottom. So now when we pull them tight, we get this knot right here. And now you'll notice that this is more 3D. There's some thickness to it.
There is quite a lot of thickness and presence.
We just want to cinch that down really nice and tight before we move on to the next step. So pulling each one of those loops individually, just want to tighten that down nice. Now all that's left to do is to take the slack out of all these loops, and we'll do that one by one. So starting with this top one, our end is already pulled tight. So this loop here, we'll follow our cord through and just find where this one comes out the other side of the knot. So you can kind of push on it a little bit, but don't loosen your knot too much. And we'll see that it comes out right here. So now I will usually hold down with my thumb on top of the knot and pull this loop to take the slack out of this one. But so you guys can see what I'm doing, I'm going to try to keep my fingers off to the side. So working that loop through, we're tightening up that top horizontal loop. And it's important to remember that this part here where the slack is now is a vertical line that goes across the top. This is not one of our horizontal loops. So now we want to find where this one comes through, and it should be on this next loop. Right here it goes through the knot. So we're going to take all the slack out of this into our next horizontal loop. And now this is a really big loop as we gain all that slack from the previous ones. Find where that feeds through. Now again, this is not a vertical loop, or sorry, not a horizontal loop, excuse me. And we'll bring it into our last one. As we're tightening this down, we want to make sure that the cord is not twisted, because that will make our knot lay incorrectly. So now with our last loop, bring it through once more, find where it comes out the other side. And then lastly, pulling on that end to take all the slack out of that very large loop. So now this is the knot we are left with. It looks kind of like a jumble of cords, but I'll kind of point out the pattern in it. You see these cords going across the top. Those are what are spiraling into the middle right here. So we've got 2 coming in from this side and 2 from this side. As for our bumps around the edge, we've got 1, 2, and 3. And we'll make that last one with this cord that we just tightened at the end. So I'm going to feed that through. I'm just going to feed it through this top loop right here. Pull the slack through, and that makes our last outer horizontal loop. So we'll do one more round of tightening just like before, just following that cord all the way through the knot, and then we'll show you what it looks like when we're done and move on to the larger one. So there's the small one all tightened down. It's a good idea to just practice this one until you get all the concepts down before moving on to the bigger one, because the bigger one has a lot more cords to keep track of. Setting up this larger knot is going to be much like the first one, except we're just going to be repeating some of the steps. So we'll start off by making those initial loops. I'm going to make it smaller this time, so we have enough cord to finish it off. And just pin it as often as you need, just like before. So there we have our 4 loops across the top, and we will have 4 on the bottom as soon as we bring this cord across the top. So just like before again, over, under, until we get to the other side. Just make sure our loops aren't overlapped, because then we'll be counting those cords out of order. So now again, just like on the smaller knot, we'll bring things across the bottom, but over the top of the cords, down through that last loop. And then on our way back to the left, we'll bring it underneath everything. So underneath those loops and underneath the standing end. And now we'll lay this cord right alongside our other row there. Go back through this knot, just following the cord that went before it, until we merge out the top of the last loop. Then we'll skip over one cord and head back the other way. So going down through this loop right here. It looks like we're doing different things on top and bottom, but we're really doing pretty much the same thing. This one is just going to be turned 90 degrees. Going back to the bottom, we'll go across the top and down through that second to last loop before heading back to the left, underneath everything. So this is where on the first one, we would just go up through this loop and be done, but we have a couple more loops to take care of in this larger version. So next we're going to come up through the second to last loop, since we did the last one the previous time. So follow that cord through till we come up right here. Make sure our rows stay in order over on the left, and then we'll be heading back through this second loop. You probably know the pattern by now, but across the bottom to go down through that second loop before heading back to the left underneath everything. With these larger knots, it becomes harder and harder to make things lay where they're supposed to. So again, you just want to make sure that these cords right here are not crossing over each other. All right, we're nearing the end. We're going to come up through that second loop on the top. And down back through the first. Down to the bottom, over the top of everything, going down through that first loop, and then back to the left. Now lastly, just like the first knot, we're going to end it by going up through that first loop. So before we tighten this down, let's go over which parts are which. Remember, we want all of these cords to lay flat without crossing over each other. And then on the top, these loops that are sticking up are actually going to be our horizontal loops. They'll be around the outside of our final knot. Then as we go to the bottom, these ones here that are already laying horizontal will be our horizontal loops. So let's make sure we have all those cords in order and pinch those in our hand before taking the pins out. For this one, my fingers might be in the way a little bit more because there's more to hang on to. And so if you need to refer back to that first smaller knot, please feel free to do so. We're going to begin by pulling on the ends before we start on the loops. So pull on that top end, that's cinching down that loop on the bottom. And pull on the bottom end, and that's pulling that loop tight on top. Now we'll go to our first loop, and this right side of it, pulling on that is going to tighten down the next one. And move on to the one right after that. And as long as you have this pinched in your fingers, the rest of this tangle is probably going to land in place. So as things start to overlap, just make sure you are holding on to that portion. So now here's our 8 loops going around in a circle. We only have 7 of them because we are going to make the last one at the very end. So now, just like before, we want to make sure that our loops are over and under in the right places. Our loop should start on the top and end on the bottom. So these cords are going to be stacked like this. Next, over and under in this stack. This one should be under in this stack. Every loop should be over first and then under, going around this direction. So now we'll do that finger thing that was a little bit hard to follow in the first one, probably. And we're going to take our fingers and put one finger in between each stack of cords right here. So I'm going to zoom back in so you can see that. So on this side, I'm going to pinch them all like this. And now we'll let go of that one very carefully as we pinch these ones in between our fingers down here as well. So now I'll begin to pull those tight. We'll have to pull on some more than others, so we'll have to readjust. Just keep on pulling all those stacks until everything is tight. And now you can see that spiral in the middle. That's exactly what we want to see. Now this next portion is going to be a little bit hard to see as I'm going to be holding on to the middle of the knot. But what we want to do is the same. We're going to take each of these loops and gradually take the slack out, going around the circle that same direction. Just like that first one. So there's our knot just about finished. All that's missing is that last bump on the top here. So like I did before, just stick it through that last vertical loop. And then I'm actually going to give it one more round of tightening so that everything looks nice and even. There you go. And there's our finished knot once it's all tightened down. I was planning on titling this video my new least favorite knot, but that wouldn't really be true. I actually like this knot a lot. It's probably just the hardest knot I know how to tie now. I had called this my least favorite knot before, the star knot. That probably still beats this one out. This is very hard to tie, but it is also a very satisfying result. So check that one out if you haven't already. I hope you guys were able to follow along with this tutorial and figure it out for yourselves. If you weren't, be sure to check out Paracord Guild's videos on the subject. Sometimes it's helpful to see things from a new angle. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.